Captain Crux had seen some wild things in his decades of space exploration, but nothing had prepared him for the data on humans. He leaned forward in his command chair aboard the Eternal Curiosity, mandibles twitching as the reinforced alloy creaked under his weight. A planet covered in corrosive liquid, racked by megastorms and crawling with predators. That was bad enough, but the real kicker, pure oxygen made up a fifth of the atmosphere. That wasn't just extreme. That was suicidal. Lieutenant Vazna stood near the display, her voice steady despite the tension on the bridge. "Sir, their world maintains 21% atmospheric oxygen, and that's not even the worst part." Crux stared at her. The combustion risk alone should make that uninhabitable. She nodded. "It's worse. Seasonal lightning storms, constant tectonic activity, periodic ice ages, and over 500 species of obligate predators larger than 50 kilograms. And that's just the ones still alive." Crux slumped back in his chair, exoskeleton clattering slightly. "And they evolved intelligence? Technological civilization? They've achieved faster than light travel," she said. "They're from the region we've long marked as the Dead Zone, an area we considered completely uninhabitable." Crux's mandibles clicked in disbelief. The Zexi had always believed their own planet was the pinnacle of death worlds. It had shaped them into hardy survivors, warriors built for extremes. But Earth made Zri Prime look like a vacation resort. "And they're not just surviving there?" he asked. "No, sir," Zana replied, swiping to a new display. "They thrive. Colonies, industry, culture. They've adapted to environments we'd never consider stepping foot on." The bridge was silent except for the low hum of the ship's systems. Even the maintenance drones seemed to pause, as if listening. Crux narrowed all four eyes. How did we miss them? They were tucked inside a region too dangerous for most of our scouts to explore. Our classifications labeled that area as extreme hazard. No one expected sentient life to arise there, let alone something like this. Vazna brought up a map of the galaxy, highlighting a spiral arm marked with bright red zones, each indicating planets too deadly for exploration. Earth was right in the middle. Crux leaned in closer. "You're telling me there's a species out there, evolved in the most lethal environment we've ever charted, who made it off-world, who built ships, colonized other planets, mastered FTL, and we just never noticed? Until now." "Yes." He let out a low, rattling breath. "So what are they like? Aggressive? Militaristic?" "Not exactly," she said. "They seem friendly, curious even." That stopped him cold. "Friendly," he echoed. "After all that?" "Sir," she said slowly, "they treat their planet's conditions like a challenge, something to push against. They don't just endure, they enjoy it. Some of their recreational activities include jumping out of flying machines and swimming with apex predators. Voluntarily." Crux couldn't stop the shiver that passed through his thorax. What kind of beings evolved in a world like that? And then laughed about it. The idea unsettled him. But more than that, it intrigued him. "Pull up first contact records," he ordered. "Let's see how they say hello." And somewhere deep inside, beneath the shock and disbelief, Crux felt something else begin to stir. A strange, grudging respect. The first time Commander Hallex met a human, he thought it was a mistake. The creature standing across from him looked deceptively fragile, pale skin, soft flesh, only 2 arms and 2 legs, no visible armor or natural weapons. By most galactic standards, it should have been prey, easy prey. But then the human smiled. It wasn't the warm expression Hallex expected from weaker species trying to avoid conflict. No, this smile had weight, confidence, calm. It was the kind of look you saw from apex predators right before they moved. Hallex's instincts, honed by years of surviving brutal border conflicts, screamed at him. He didn't show it, of course. As a veteran of the Mir Coalition, he'd faced enemies twice his size with nerves of steel. But something about the human's presence unsettled him. They were in the neutral zone, part of a diplomatic exchange aboard a mutual trade station. The human, introduced simply as Captain Reyes, extended a hand. Halleck stared at it for a moment before shaking it cautiously. "You're the first of your kind I've met in person," Reyes said casually, his accent crisp but relaxed. "We've heard some interesting things." "Likewise," Halleck replied, studying the man's face. "No fear, no bluffing. Just measured, calm intensity." Later that cycle, Halleck pulled up footage of human history, curious. He expected to see the typical rise of a young species, tribal warfare, primitive technology, gradual unification. What he found instead stunned him. Humans had clawed their way up from a death world, yes, but what truly shocked him was how they did it. Through war, yes, but also through resilience, grit, a bizarre kind of unity that formed under pressure like metal forged in plasma. They'd survived plagues that wiped out millions, rebuilt after apocalyptic world wars, launched themselves into space with technology that, by galactic standards, was reckless and primitive. And they kept going, again and again, through catastrophe after catastrophe. They didn't wait for ideal conditions. They made conditions work. Halleck watched old footage of humans building shelters during acid storms, performing surgery in war zones, delivering aid to enemies after battles. There were mistakes, chaos, blood, but there was also something else. Something rare. "They don't stop," he muttered aloud, rewinding a clip of a human astronaut duct taping a cracked visor during a mission gone wrong, then completing the mission anyway. "They just don't stop." He ran a biomechanical analysis. Physically, they weren't exceptional. No claws, no armor, moderate strength. But their stamina, their pain tolerance, off the charts. Their brains were wired not just for survival, but for adaptation, change, persistence. And their culture. It was built on the idea of pushing forward no matter what. Failures were stories. Scars were lessons. He thought back to that first handshake with Reyes. How firm it had been. How calm the man had looked. Not arrogance. Not threat. Not threat. Readiness. It became clear to Halleck that humans didn't dominate because they were the strongest or fastest. They dominated because no one else could keep getting back up after the kind of punishment Earth delivered daily. And if the galaxy thought they'd crumble under pressure, they hadn't been paying attention. There's something unnerving about a species that treats war like a science. Not because they enjoy it. No, that would be easier to understand. It's because they study it, dissect it, and refine it with the same precision they bring to engineering or medicine. That's what truly shook the galactic powers when humans finally arrived on the battlefield. At first, most of the Council thought Earth would be a minor player, a backwater planet with too many internal divisions to matter. Sure, they'd seen a few combat clips, human units surviving ambushes, improvising weapons, pulling off near-suicidal rescues, but every species had its stories. War makes legends, even among cowards. But humans didn't just fight. They learned, fast. Within a single cycle, their military adapted to galactic tech. Within 2, they'd started improving it. And not just by copying. They questioned everything: shield configurations, ship formations, energy dispersion rates. Where others followed tradition, humans ran simulations, crunched numbers, tested theories. And when those failed, they tested again. One commander, a Koran warlord, laughed when he heard a human general rewrote his entire battle doctrine mid-campaign. "No one does that," he said. "It takes years to develop doctrine." He stopped laughing after the 3rd ambush wiped out his advanced scouts. The humans didn't fight like the rest of the galaxy. They moved in unpredictable patterns, used terrain no sane soldier would approach, and coordinated strikes with a kind of decentralized chaos that confused traditional armies. One squad could hold a position 10 times longer than projected. Another would vanish into the landscape and reappear behind enemy lines. 3 days later, half-starved but victorious. Even their logistics were brutal and efficient. One admiral reviewed their supply chain and whispered, "They're planning for failure like it's part of the strategy." And it was. That's what unnerved us most. Humans didn't plan assuming things would go right. They planned knowing things would go wrong. Ammo would run out. Comms would fail. Units would be cut off. Instead of avoiding those scenarios, they trained for them. Relished them, even. One captured soldier, when interrogated, said something the translators didn't quite understand. "Embrace the suck," he muttered. It became a phrase whispered in hushed voices across briefing rooms. It meant they leaned into hardship, thrived in it. The humans didn't just want to win. They wanted to understand war better than anyone else. Their academies didn't just teach tactics, they taught psychology, sociology, even ancient philosophy. They studied their own mistakes like sacred texts. They respected their enemies, not out of weakness, but because knowing your enemy meant knowing how to break them. And they were never afraid to die. Not recklessly, but with purpose. When human special forces were cornered on Tharsis Ridge, they didn't retreat. They split into cells, scattered into the darkness, and turned a hopeless position into weeks of terror for the enemy. By the time reinforcements arrived, the enemy was begging for extraction. The humans had lost 2/3 of their unit, but held the line. That's when the Council realized humans didn't fight to conquer. They fought to understand, to adapt, to evolve. And if they ever truly mastered the science of war, the rest of us might not survive the lesson. When the Council first invited humans into diplomatic negotiations, no one expected them to be polite, not just courteous, strategic. They didn't posture like the Regari or sneer like the Zenthal. They listened, they asked questions, they took notes. It threw everyone off, because legends said humans were war-born violent deathworlders with a flair for destruction. But in the chamber, they were calm, focused, disciplined. And behind their calm was something far more dangerous than firepower: intent. They weren't there to bark demands or intimidate. They were there to understand us. When a delegation from the Tarvex Syndicate tried to pressure the human envoy into revealing Earth's fleet positions, the ambassador simply smiled and redirected the conversation. "Let's not waste time with threats," he said. "Let's talk incentives." He didn't blink once, didn't raise his voice, just adjusted his sleeve and continued as if nothing had happened. The Tarvex didn't get their answer, but a week later, 3 of their supply convoys vanished. No trace, no comms, just gone. It wasn't war, it was proof. A quiet message. Don't mistake our patience for weakness. Over time, the Council started noticing patterns. Humans always showed up prepared, always knew the laws, quoted them, sometimes better than the original drafters. They read every treaty, highlighted every loophole. When they signed something, it was airtight. And when they didn't sign something, you knew they were already working on an alternative faster, cheaper, better aligned with their interests. One delegate once joked, "Humans don't play the game, they rewrite the rulebook." The joke didn't feel funny after Earth brokered 3 major trade routes without Council oversight. But what scared us most wasn't their intelligence. It was their self-control. They didn't lash out, even when insulted. They didn't overreact to provocations. They picked their battles quietly, methodically. And when they acted, it was decisive. No second chances, no long speeches, just results. During the Zavaren dispute, a border skirmish turned bloody. 2 human colonies were hit. Everyone expected retaliation, but the humans sent negotiators first. They offered a ceasefire, asked for restitution, and proposed joint security oversight. The Zavaran refused. 72 hours later, their weapons platforms were offline, their command structures shattered, and their planetary grid fried. No deaths, no civilian casualties, just silence and a human fleet hovering overhead, waiting for a reply. That's how Earth operated. Not with rage, but with strategy, with purpose. They didn't need to conquer the galaxy. They just made it clear, if they wanted to, they could. And they'd do it without firing a shot more than necessary. That's the part people keep misunderstanding. It's not that humans are unstoppable. It's that they choose not to dominate yet. Because domination isn't their endgame. Influence is. leverage, long-term positioning. They're not the kind of power that demands obedience. They're the kind that makes you want to agree with them, just to avoid the alternative. And if you think that's weakness, you've already lost. It started with a rumor. Whispers among station crews and smugglers. Humans were being trusted to guard alien young. Not hired. Not assigned. Trusted. At first, everyone laughed it off. Deathworlders babysitting? The species known for surviving firestorms and biting through combat steel now being asked to watch over delicate cubs and larva spawn? Absurd. Until the stories kept coming. A Tolarn clutch mother on the border moons left her hatchlings with a human engineer during a reactor emergency. The station logs showed it all. He built a makeshift thermal nest out of coolant tubing and humming insulation panels, regulated their breathing with soft, rhythmic hums, and even shielded them during a minor hull breach using his own suit. The mother returned to find them asleep. Safe, untouched. That recording spread like wildfire across the interstellar nets. Some claimed it was faked. Others said it was a one-time anomaly. Then it happened again. And again. A Grelvark tribe on the edge of the mining colonies entrusted a group of their adolescent hunters to a human outpost during a resource shortage. The tried elders watched from the cliffs for days, expecting negligence or harm. What they saw instead was astonishing. Humans teaching the Grelvark youths how to set up solar traps, ration food, map terrain. No shouting, no power displays. Just quiet guidance and deep respect. The alien youth returned to their people not only healthy, but changed. More curious, more confident, more grounded. Humans didn't treat them like children, the elder later said. They treated them like equals learning to grow. That's when things shifted. It wasn't their toughness or their weapons that made humans uniquely suited for guardianship. It was something older, deeper, compassion forged in chaos. Because humanity had raised generations in the harshest conditions imaginable. Fires, floods, wars, famine. But in those moments, they didn't abandon their young. They protected them sometimes at impossible cost. Their survival instincts weren't just reactive, they were generational. And they extended that instinct to others. A Xernbi diplomat once said, "A human will run into a burning building for a stranger. Imagine what they'll do for someone they care about." It's why so many species, even predator nations, began requesting humans as security aides, mentors, and educators. Not because humans were the strongest, but because they never turned away from vulnerability. They leaned into it. In human culture, there's a phrase, protect the innocent. It isn't just moral, it's instinctual. Even in the middle of war zones, human medics were seen carrying alien infants to safety. Some didn't make it, many did. The ones who survived, they remembered. Now, in the neutral zone, there's a new kind of sanctuary. Not a fortress, a school. Run by humans, filled with children from every species. No borders, no propaganda. Just learning, play, and strangely peace. People still ask, how can we trust them? The better question is, why do they keep showing us more trust than we show them? Maybe it's because they understand something we don't. That strength isn't proven in how well you dominate, but in how gently you carry those who can't yet stand on their own. And in that quiet, undeniable truth, humanity stands alone. The briefing room fell silent the moment the footage played. No one expected to see a human there, not in that kind of role. A joint rescue op had gone sideways. A planetary landslide cut off a convoy of civilians, mostly scientists and their families from multiple species. The area was unstable, too unstable for most standard responders. The footage showed a shaky drone view. Smoke, collapsed terrain, scattered debris. And in the middle of it all, a single human, covered in ash, hauling a wounded Drenari child up a ridge one-handed while cradling a second under the other arm. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't even rational. The terrain was actively crumbling. But the human didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. They just moved. 3 more children were pulled from the rubble before backup even arrived. And when asked why he did it, The human simply said, "Wouldn't you?" That moment went viral, but it wasn't an isolated case. Turns out, humans had this strange pattern of showing up when things got bad. Not as warriors, not even as medics, just as the ones who stayed. Flood on Dale 3? It was the human dock workers who dove into submerged tunnels to get the children out first. Plasma fire on an orbital station? Human custodians carried half the nursery wing to safety using nothing but a thermal blanket and a stubborn refusal to quit. They weren't trained for it. Often, they weren't even supposed to be there. But they were. When asked, some aliens assumed it was a cultural thing, some programmed instinct to rescue young. But the truth was simpler than that. It wasn't about species. It was about life. If there's a kid screaming in the dark, one human rescue worker said, you don't check the manual, you run. And maybe that's what made them so different. Other species had systems, protocols, chains of command. Humans had heart. They acted before fear had time to take root. Over time, alien parents began to notice. When things went wrong, fires, explosions, even riots, it was the humans who were already moving. They didn't look for orders. They looked for the small hands, the crying voices, the curled-up shapes too scared to breathe. Then they ran toward them. Some aliens called it reckless. Others called it madness. But more and more started calling it something else. Trust. In one report, Axelari commander wrote, "A human will throw themselves into danger for a child that isn't even theirs. There is no logic to it. Only something deeper. Something older than reason." Now, in some colonies, human volunteers are posted near schools, clinics, and transport hubs, not as guards, but as watchers. Not because they're the fastest or strongest, because they won't leave, and children know it. Even ones who've never spoken to a human instinctively reach for them when scared. There's something about their calm under chaos, the way they kneel, open-armed, even when the world's falling apart. That kind of safety isn't taught. It's earned. No one made humans take this role. They chose it, not for glory, not for praise, but because someone had to. And when no one else would, humans stepped forward, like they always do. The first time Commander Vril saw a human eat lunch during a firefight, he thought the man had lost his mind. Gunfire cracked in the distance. The forward line was under pressure. Alarms blared. And yet, there the humans sat back against a half-blasted wall, helmet off, calmly chewing a ration bar like it was a quiet afternoon. Vril shouted, "Are you malfunctioning?" The human glanced up, wiped his mouth, and shrugged. "Not yet. You want half?" It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't ignorance. It was something else, something deeper. Humans had a way of staying calm when they had every reason not to be. They didn't pretend the danger wasn't there. They simply refused to let it own them. Later, Vril learned this behavior had a name: dark humor. To most species, the concept was unthinkable. Humor was reserved for celebration, for bonding, for safe spaces. Not chaos. But humans, they laughed in the middle of disasters, made jokes while bleeding, nicknamed explosions, gave ironic awards to each other for surviving things that should have broken them. It was confusing, disturbing even, until you realized something important. The humor wasn't for fun. It was a shield. On the third day of that campaign, Vril's unit was trapped behind a collapsed ravine. Supplies were low. Morale was worse. No backup coming. Then the human call sign Mitch stood up on a rock and declared, "All right, boys. Time to earn our free therapy sessions." It was ridiculous, but someone chuckled. Then another. And for the first time in hours, they moved not like soldiers dragging their feet toward doom, but like people who remembered what hope felt like. That was the moment Vril understood. Human humor didn't erase the fear. It cut through it, like a crack in the wall letting in light. Sometimes it was morbid. Sometimes it was absurd, but it reminded everyone that they were still alive, that they still had each other. And in war, that mattered. One Terran general once said, "Laughter is how we bite back." If the universe wants us to go quietly, it picked the wrong species. There's truth in that. After the battle, Vril looked into human history, found entire units who kept morale high through nothing but inside jokes and ridiculous traditions, found letters from soldiers who scribbled puns on grenades, found records of medics who sang show tunes while stitching up wounds just to distract their patients. It wasn't denial. It was survival. Now, many alien units request at least one human on squad, not just for combat, but for morale. They've seen the difference. One moment, everything's falling apart. The next, someone cracks a joke about how this is still better than my last job. And somehow, it helps. Even children respond to it. When humans help evacuate schools, they don't just lead. They comfort. They tell stories. They make faces. They give kids permission to laugh, even just a little in the middle of fear. Because sometimes, survival isn't just about fighting harder. It's about remembering why you fight at all. And humans, they remember, even if it means smiling through the fire. Even if it means joking in the dark. When the Galactic Council first heard about a vacation resort being built on a Class N death world, they assumed it was either a translation error or a prank. It wasn't. The place was real, and it quickly became the most talked about location in the galaxy. It was called Extreme Horizons Resort and Spa, and it was run by none other than Sarah Chen, now famous as both a restaurant chain tycoon and the newly appointed Chief Experience Officer of the galaxy's first cross-species extreme tourism company. Would you like to try our signature acid rain mud bath? Very exfoliating, she said cheerfully to a deeply concerned health and safety inspector, whose environmental suit had already beeped 3 times in alarm. You've got volcanoes within viewing distance of the main lodge, the inspector pointed out, his voice crackling through his rebreather. Oh yes, said Kex, Sarah's co-founder and a proud Zexy, whose exoskeleton gleamed with a fresh coat of protective resin. That's why we picked this location. The lava provides excellent spa heating, and the volcanic lightning. Incredible atmosphere during dinner service. The inspector scrolled through the resort's activities list with visible dread. Anti-gravity bungee jumping into geysers, lightning surfing, toxic mud obstacle courses. You're encouraging people to do this on purpose? Of course, Sarah replied with a grin. But don't worry, we have the best safety protocols in the galaxy. Rescue drones designed by the Death School's top graduates. Waivers that cover nearly every scenario. Plus, the guests love it. And they did. The resort quickly became the flagship achievement of the joint human-Zex educational exchange. What had started as a school where both species taught each other how to survive their deadly home planets had now birthed a hospitality empire. The main lodge itself was a masterpiece, somehow managing to feel welcoming while still looking like it could take a meteor strike without flinching. It featured 3 distinct atmospheric zones. One mimicked Earth conditions, including a weather room that simulated natural disasters for homesick humans. One recreated the crushing gravity and acidic environment of Zex. And the third was a shared space designed to challenge both species, just enough to be thrilling but survivable. That shared area? It had become a magnet for thrill-seeking diplomats and adrenaline junkie vacationers from dozens of worlds. Word spread fast across the galaxy. If you wanted an unforgettable experience, Extreme Horizons was the place. One of the resort's most infamous spots was its premier restaurant, The Last Resort. A heavily reinforced structure labeled with hazard signs in 12 languages. Its menu crafted by Jennifer Martinez, the same Death School student who once invented Galaxy-famous Ultra Hot Sauce, featured a heat-based challenge system. Diners had to pass a spice tolerance test to advance to each level. It was wildly popular. So popular, in fact, that the resort's insurance policy had to be rewritten 6 times in 1 month. And still, guests kept coming. Tour groups signed up for lightning surfing experiences. Families of Zexy youth eagerly registered for Hurricane Edition extreme sports. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. What began as an improbable, borderline insane experiment in shared education had turned into something even crazier, a booming industry. And Sarah? She simply smiled at the chaos and said, "In space, no one can hear you scheme, but they can hear the boom when your chemistry project goes wrong." That's the fun part. Nobody expected a luxury brand to come out of Death World tourism, but within a year, Extreme Horizons wasn't just a resort anymore. It had become a movement, a brand, and to many across the galaxy, a way of life. The model was simple. Turn lethal environments into thrill-seeking playgrounds, and package it all with a flawless mix of human creativity and sexy engineering. New Extreme Horizons locations began popping up on some of the most inhospitable planets in the galaxy. Each one specialized in showcasing that world's unique dangers as premium attractions. On Electric Storm Prime, tourists signed up for the Lightning Strike Golf Challenge, a 9-hole course where players teed off between timed bursts of electrical storms. On Neutron Beach Resort, guests tried their hand at zero-G wrestling under crushing gravitational waves. Morin 6 offered acid rain rafting through its highly caustic rivers, while Silica Major advertised glass desert sandstorm surfing, where visibility was a luxury and survival gear was considered part of the sport. But the real breakthrough wasn't just the activities, it was the attitude. Sarah Chen and Kex didn't market danger. They marketed transformation. Why just survive? Sarah had asked at a trade expo, when you can thrive in chaos. Her message stuck. The resorts weren't selling vacations. They were selling bravery, and it caught on like wildfire. Soon, what had once been considered suicidal became desirable. Wealthy elites from low-risk planets suddenly found themselves bragging about vacationing near active lava flows or attending mindfulness retreats next to methane geysers. They weren't just chasing adrenaline, they were chasing identity. The fashion industry was quick to respond. Battle-scarred chic, as the trend was now known, filled galactic runways. Functional hazard suits became status symbols complete with decorative scorch marks, acid etchings, and even souvenir lightning burns. If your environmental suit looked like it had survived a meteor shower, you were doing it right. Cuisine evolved too. Jennifer Martinez's The Last Resort had sparked a culinary revolution. Survival dining became the newest craze. Dozens of copycat restaurants opened across the galaxy, each one offering meals that required tolerance training, dietary risk assessments, and in some cases, a full medical team on standby. One establishment in the crystalline territories served food so spicy it had to be plated with robotic arms. Extreme Horizons expanded beyond just resorts. They launched Death World Adventures, a high-risk educational tourism company. Sarah described it as a gap-year program with more lava. The company's first student group, made up of multiple species, blogged their travels under the name Dancing with Death, responsibly, and became instant celebrities. Kex, now proudly titled the Galactic Minister of Extreme Tourism and Cultural Exchange, summed it up during a press conference. "We took fear and turned it into fascination. Now the galaxy can't get enough." And he wasn't wrong. Demand was overwhelming. The gift shop alone, featuring merchandise like I Cheated Death on My Vacation t-shirts and custom burn mark mugs, had become a multi-billion credit operation. Tourists were no longer asking, "Is it safe?" They were asking, "How extreme is it?" Extreme Horizons wasn't just a brand. It had become a galactic icon of boldness, curiosity, and calculated recklessness. And Sarah, standing at the top of her newly built corporate tower, just smiled at the chaos unfolding across the stars. When the original Death World Academy opened, skeptics called it reckless, dangerous, insane. Now, just a few years later, it was the most sought-after educational institution in the galaxy, a cross-species training ground for those bold enough to embrace danger as a classroom. What began as a small-scale educational exchange between humans and Zexi had transformed into a full-scale academy that attracted applicants from all over the galaxy. The curriculum was unlike anything else. Courses included introduction to breathing optional environments, extreme climate navigation, and interspecies emergency response under hostile conditions. The entrance exam wasn't a test. It was a 3-day survival challenge on a Class 5 Death World. Most species wouldn't have dared set foot there 5 years ago. Now, students were lining up for the chance. Inside the academy grounds, every building was designed to handle the unthinkable. The main dormitory, nicknamed the Survival Hall, was engineered to withstand earthquakes, acid storms, and gravitational flux. It had 3 zones: Earth Standard, Zexy Atmosphere, and a neutral zone called the Chaos Wing. That wing was built for adaptability training. Temperatures shifted hourly, gravity varied by hallway, and simulated disasters were scheduled like pop quizzes. But what truly set the academy apart was its culture. Students weren't just taught to survive. They were taught to thrive. Human instructors brought real-world grit and improvisation. Zexy mentors emphasized resilience, adaptation, and scientific precision. Together, they created a unique environment that encouraged calculated risk, cross-species empathy, and creative problem-solving under pressure. The student body was just as diverse as the staff. Formerly delicate species like the vapory and the crystallines were now arriving in droves, fitted with custom environmental suits designed by the Academy's own engineering division. Some of them could barely walk in normal gravity when they arrived. By the end of the year, they were free climbing obsidian cliffs and navigating methane oceans in homemade submersibles. It wasn't just physical training. Classes included diplomacy under duress, crisis team leadership, and cross-cultural trauma navigation. The idea was simple: shared hardship builds bonds that diplomacy alone never could. That's why the Academy doubled as a neutral meeting ground for political negotiations. More than one treaty had been brokered over lava raft team-building exercises and lightning field scavenger hunts. The social aspect of the Academy was just as intense as the academics. The student blog, Dancing with Death, responsibly, had gone viral, sharing survival tips, extreme dating stories, and fashion guides for making your hazard suit pop in high-acid environments. One particularly popular post: Top 10 Most Delicious, Possibly Toxic, Plants. Even romance found a way. Students from wildly different species bonded over their shared struggles, repairing suits in a dust storm, making fire from volcanic ash, or just laughing about the absurdity of their latest fun field trip to a black hole-adjacent crater. By the 3rd year, the Academy had redefined what education could look like. It wasn't just about knowledge, it was about transformation. As Sarah liked to say during orientation, you won't leave here the same species you were when you arrived. That's the point. And somewhere, on a planet covered in storms and lava, students from across the stars were proving just that, one near-death lab project at a time. The rumors started with a map, hand-drawn, frayed at the edges, and tucked into the back of an old Academy handbook found in the library's restricted archive. It showed a series of tunnels beneath the campus grounds, unlabeled, unacknowledged, and definitely not on any official blueprint. Naturally, the humans wanted in. Sarah, Eli, and Kira, a trio of second-year students, had heard whispers about the old base from the Zexy students, who mostly dismissed it as myth. Supposedly, before the Death World Academy was built, the land had been used as a hidden bunker during one of the galaxy's darker eras, back when Zexy and humans had first crossed paths in secret. A failed experiment in cooperation, or maybe a testing site for extreme environment tech. No one knew for sure. But that map, it was real. It took weeks to gather the gear without raising suspicion. Motion sensors, magnetic picks, filtered oxygen masks, and an old decryption slate Eli borrowed from the Academy's robotics lab. They waited until the scheduled plasma storm when outside communication blacked out for 18 hours and most students sheltered inside. The entrance was behind the old greenhouse, hidden under a collapsed service hatch. It looked like nothing more than rusted-out piping until Kira activated her handheld scanner. A faint energy pulse registered old, but still functional. They slipped inside. The tunnel smelled of ozone and dust. Not decay, something older, like time itself had settled into the walls. The deeper they went, the more surreal it became. The temperature dropped. Lights flickered on as they walked past, responding to their presence. None of this should still be active. Then came the doors, massive, alloy-forged slabs etched with both Zexy and human symbols warnings. equations, and one phrase in both languages: knowledge without balance destroys. Inside, they found what looked like a forgotten lab. Cryopods lined one wall, their contents empty but intact. Holographic data logs flickered to life, showing test footage of early interspecies survival experiments, humans and Zexi working together under crushing gravity, surviving acid blizzards, simulating zero-oxygen combat. This is the prototype for the Academy, Sarah whispered, stunned. Before the treaty, before everything. But not all of it was aspiring. Deeper in, they found holding cells. Not for prisoners, no shackles, but for containment. Some were scorched from the inside, others frozen solid. Notes scribbled in multiple languages detailed biological experiments pushed too far. Zexi and human scientists arguing in recorded logs, promising unity, but descending into fear. Ethics had clearly eroded near the end. Then came the final chamber. At its center stood a massive console and archive core, still humming. Eli activated it. Holograms burst into life around them. Simulations of alternate futures, some beautiful, others catastrophic. One showed the Academy uniting hundreds of species. Another showed it turned into a weapons lab. One even showed Earth burning in retaliation after a failed experiment triggered a diplomatic collapse. It wasn't just a base, Kira murmured. It was a choice point, a test for cooperation. They backed up everything they could onto a secure drive and resealed the entrance before slipping back into the stormy night. When the Academy resumed operations the next day, no one suspected a thing. But the trio knew better. The Academy hadn't just been built on the edge of danger, it had always stood on the razor's edge between hope and disaster. And now they held the proof. It started with a stare. Not one of intimidation, but something quieter, calculated, curious. The kind of look a predator gives when it's trying to figure out whether you're a threat or something else entirely. The predator in question was a Corthon exchange student named Drassic, 7 feet tall, armored hide, eyes like liquid mercury. A species known across the galaxy for their hunting instincts and single combat rituals. Corthons didn't mix well with prey species, and humans? No one had quite figured out where they stood. Until the sparring match. Every student at Death World Academy had to take combat readiness, 101, regardless of species. Most treated it like an exercise, but the Corthons treated it like truth. Drassic volunteered for the open duel session. Everyone expected him to pick another predator species, maybe a Ravelek or one of the Claude Venari. Instead, he pointed at Aiden. The human. Laughter rippled across the observers. Not mocking, exactly more like disbelief. Aiden wasn't small, but next to Drassic, he looked fragile. No claws, no fangs, no armor plating. Just a plain sparring uniform and steady eyes. Drassic growled below. Human, you accept. Aiden nodded once. Yeah, I'm in. What followed was not a fight. It was a lesson. Drassic charged, fast for something his size. Aiden didn't dodge. He absorbed the blow, redirected the momentum, and sent the Corthan sprawling. It wasn't brute strength, it was technique. Calm, controlled movement. Precision instead of power. Drassic came back, harder. Aiden ducked, twisted, struck short bursts aimed at joints, not organs. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to teach. By the end of the match, Drassic wasn't angry. He was still. His species didn't value victory as much as worthy opposition, and Aiden had met him not as prey, not as predator, but as equal. After that day, things changed. Drassic started showing up early to training sessions, not to dominate, but to learn. To observe the human fighting style, how they conserved energy, how they used psychology as much as muscle, how they seemed to understand fear and still move forward. He started walking with the humans in the mess hall, not talking at first, just being near, listening. One night, while on perimeter watch duty, he finally spoke. "You feel fear," Drassic said. "I saw it. You fight anyway. That is not weakness. That is rare. Aiden shrugged. We're not built to win fights the way you are. So we learn, we adapt. Drassic nodded, slow and thoughtful. In Korthon culture, we respect only those who earn it in blood or wisdom. You bled. You endured. That is enough. Word spread. Other predator species took notice not because of strength, but because of composure. Because humans didn't posture. They didn't escalate. They simply endured, and when pushed, they responded with terrifying effectiveness. And when young cubs from the more aggressive species began shadowing the humans in the Academy's common areas, sitting with them, mimicking them, it wasn't out of fear. It was out of something deeper. Respect, because the predators had finally seen the truth. Humans weren't prey. They weren't predators either. They were something new, something that stared down fear and didn't flinch. And in a galaxy shaped by power, that made them unforgettable. It started with a question no one wanted to ask out loud. Why didn't the predator species let their young near humans? It wasn't official policy. No one at Deathworld Academy enforced it, but everyone noticed it. The cubs, pups, hatchlings, whatever form the young ones took, they never shared quarters with humans. Never sat with them in the common areas. Never entered classrooms unless a barrier was in place. The younger species were always placed in learning clusters divided by physical need, threat level, or socio-cultural compatibility. But humans were the only ones consistently isolated. At first, the excuse was logistics. Atmosphere tolerance, gravity needs, dietary differences. But after a few cycles, everyone could see it wasn't that. Other species adapted. The humans had already adjusted themselves to every condition the Academy threw at them. So why the distance? The truth came out slowly, in fragments. A slip of the tongue here, a quiet confession there. Until one day, Aliao, one of the humans assigned to interspecies communication, asked a visiting caretaker outright. It was a Parnassi, a species known for their protective instincts. Tall, insectoid, always surrounded by their tiny, soft-shelled young. The caretaker paused for a long time before answering. You are capable. Too capable, Alia frowned. That's a problem. You do not harm the young, the Parnassi clarified. You protect them. Fiercely. Even when they are not yours. We have seen this. But it is your potential for violence that concerns us. She waited. When danger comes, the Parnassi said softly, you do not hesitate. You do not posture or threaten. You simply act fast. Without warning, we have watched your response times, your accuracy under pressure. It is not instinct. It is choice. That makes it worse. Another species chimed in later, this time a Graph. Clawed, territorial, aggressive in combat, but deeply family-oriented. He told a story. His youngling had wandered too close to a human during a simulated emergency drill. The human Caleb had reacted instantly, grabbed the child, shielded him, and took a hit meant for the group. It wasn't a heroic gesture. Caleb hadn't hesitated. No speech, no drama, just movement. It was terrifying, the Grath said. Because it was automatic, efficient, not desperate, not emotional, just trained. That's when it clicked. The reason predator species didn't bring their young near humans wasn't fear of harm. It was fear of influence. Because when the young saw humans, they didn't see monsters. They saw calm protectors, problem solvers, beings who carried lethal potential behind steady eyes, and they admired that. Too much. One cub started mimicking a human's habit of scanning rooms for exits. Another began copying breathing techniques used by human soldiers. A small Venari kid stopped snarling during arguments and began using negotiation tactics she picked up from observing Earth diplomats. The elders were alarmed, not because the young were in danger, but because they were changing, losing the old predator instincts, replacing them with something far more deliberate. And in that shift, the elders saw a future they didn't fully understand. So quietly, respectfully, they pulled their young back, Not out of hatred, not out of distrust, but because they knew, once a young predator looked up to a human, there was no going back. The silence in the strategy room was heavy, thick, with the tension only interspecies war briefings could bring. A dozen commanders from 6 different worlds stood around the holographic table, blinking at the data feeds scrolling across it. A campaign had ended. Swiftly, cleanly, the enemy fleet, a rogue coalition from the outer fracture, had been neutralized. But that wasn't the part that left the room quiet. It was what came after. They let them go, someone finally said. A Varaxi general slammed his clawed hand against the table. They had full orbital control, power grid offline, shields down. They could have ended it. They should have, but the humans didn't. The lead tactician, Colonel Hart, leaned forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. We achieved surrender. That was the objective. You had the power to wipe them out, the Grith envoy growled. Why show mercy to a species that wouldn't do the same? Hart didn't flinch. Because if we only fight to destroy, then we become what we claim to stand against. That answer unsettled more than a few in the room. It wasn't weakness. That was the problem. No one doubted Earth's capacity for violence. The humans were terrifyingly good at it. Precision strikes, psychological warfare, adaptive tactics, they redefined what it meant to be strategic predators. They didn't dominate through sheer strength. They dismantled enemies like puzzles, but they rarely finished with a kill. A trend diplomat once said, when a human spares you, it is not because you deserve it, it's because they decided to. And that's what unnerved the other species. The choice, the restraint. Some species fought because of instinct, others for pride, for territory, for resources. But humans, they fought because they had to. And when the fight was over, they stopped. Even when they didn't have to. There were stories, hundreds of them. A squad of Earth soldiers who captured a pirate captain that had slaughtered colonists. Instead of executing him, they airlifted him to a tribunal, sat with the survivors, and helped rebuild the outpost. A human diplomat who defused an interclan blood feud, not with bribes or threats, but by sitting with both leaders and asking, "How many more sons are you willing to bury?" A child 8 years old who had every reason to hate after losing her family to a mining raid. Instead, she grew up to become a mediator for the same species that attacked her home. That's what made humans dangerous, not just what they could do, but what they chose not to do. And in that, there was something older than war, something that transcended strategy or dominance. Empathy. Not softness, not naivety, true understanding. The kind that comes from pain endured and lessons learned. Humans didn't spare because they were weak. They spared because they knew what vengeance cost, because they'd already paid that price many times over. So when Hart looked across the table and said, "We don't kill because we can," no one laughed. Because they knew. The galaxy had many predators, but only one species that mastered the art of mercy and wielded it like a weapon.